Hey all, here's my video on the Mars-Jupiter conjunction, hands down the most powerful astrological event of the entirety of August. And this is because it's forming what's called a T-square to Saturn and Venus, which means Jupiter and Mars are next to each other in the sky. They're 90 degrees away from Saturn. On the other side, 90 degrees away from Venus. Venus is therefore opposed Saturn. It's called a T-square. Very powerful event. And this is occurring right during the DNC as the Aquarian full moon is occurring. So although I'll be describing the archetypal potentials and evolutionary intentions of this event, for better or for worse, I'll be using the DNC as a living metaphor on how we can work with these energies as a collective, which means, every pocket of the world is going to be working with this energy as well, and how we can work with it in our own personal lives. And I do like to focus a little bit more on political events this year because this is such an important political year for humanity. Something like, I think, 42% of the countries in the world have had or will have an important election year. And just taking a step back at the bigger picture, I've said this many times over the last few years, by the year 2027, the world will be completely changed. Humanity, as we know it, will be completely changed, which means we're bumping on to a whole new timeline. Now, is that a more positive timeline or a more negative timeline? That depends on the choices we make as a collective. 2027 is the major pivot point because we have the three most outer planets all changing signs within a few years of each other. We have Pluto already changed into Aquarius. We have Uranus going to be changing into Gemini, and we have Neptune changing into the sign of Aries. Boom, boom, boom. Three major shock waves of archetypal change. It's going to be, and we're already seeing the beginnings of this now, a whole new world. And since this is such an important election year, and 2027 is just a few years away, the people who enter into power now will be playing a major role for that upcoming shift. So before we dive into the chart, I got a quick announcement. As many of you know, I have a new YouTube channel I started in January known as Meditation Nexus, and I just got qualifications to be monetized, which means I now have full control over the ad placements in my videos. As many of you know, you haven't been able to enjoy my meditations because they get interrupted by ads. That's no longer the case. So if you're one of the folks that have been discouraged and not practicing my meditations because of that, they are now ad-free. And I just created a custom designed meditation for this very event. You can find a link above or below. Check it out. With that being said, let's go ahead and look at the chart. As you can see, we have this Jupiter-Mars conjunction happening in the sign of Gemini. It's in a T-square to Venus and Saturn. You see the big red triangle in the middle of the chart. And this is occurring with or during the Aquarian full moon, right as the DNC starts. And Kamala Harris is now the nominee for the Democratic Party. I'll actually say some things about her chart in a bit here, but let's just focus on this for now. So much to unpack here. We'll start with just Saturn square Jupiter. I mean, these are the two biggest bodies in the solar system besides the sun. These two gravitational bosses of the sky are in this, friction or tension-based aspect of the 90-degree angle. And this creates great challenge between them, which is not to say we can't absolutely get them right in a very powerful, meaningful way in our life, putting turbo boosters on our growth and evolution. So there is a very powerful way to get this right. However, it's more difficult to get it right because it is a square. And I talked about this in my last video. I'll just do the Cliff Notes version here. One of the core evolutionary intentions of Saturn square Jupiter is to pick something incredibly difficult in your life. That's the nature of Saturn, the greater malefic, the planet of challenge. Pick your metaphorical mountain to climb, and then do the hard work necessary to make the ascent and believe that you can make it to the top. This is the Jupiter element of this, the greater benefic, the planet of faith and expansion and luck. And if you can make the ascent, even though it will be incredibly difficult to rise to that challenge and to succeed at that challenge, prize is worth the effort. That is Saturn's promise. What you shall reap, you shall sow. It's the cosmic paycheck. So you can think in your own personal life, is there a mountain I can climb? Is there something difficult where I can apply myself in that direction that will be incredibly rewarding? Now, more generically, how these planets can kind of get in the way of each other during this time, especially when we put it in the context of, political climate and such. Saturn, in every culture around the world that's had astrology, is always known as Saturn the Elder. It represents wisdom. Much of that wisdom is derived from the past. It's the old elder archetype. So it represents the past, whereas Jupiter is much more forward-thinking. It's much more expansive. It's future-oriented. Here they are in square to each other. So one of the ways this can manifest is the past as we know it, Saturn, is not in alignment with the future that we'd like to create for ourselves, or the future that we're talking about. It's like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. As people analyze the past, as we observed it, because we've lived through it, it's like, well, it hasn't really worked out that way. And if you put this in the context of politicians like Kamala or Donald Trump, I'm sure Trump's going to be doing his events during this time as well, during the DNC. They both fall into the trap of, okay, here's the history you've already established as a politician. Here's the promises you're making. Well, the past doesn't really line up with the future you're presenting. But of course, people can change their ways, change their tune. If they focus on that mountain to climb, this truly great work in the spirit of Jupiterian optimism, and they speak about it, and this is the more Gemini part of this equation. Gemini is the planet of communication. Here, Jupiter next to Mars, this is an ambitious couple here. Jupiter, the greater benefic, is holding hands in the sky with Mars, the war god, the planet of action, the ultimate triggering planet of the sky. Both of these planets, what they have in common, especially in the sign of Gemini, is movement forward. I love to use the example of Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, the old TV series and movies from the late 90s. To boldly go where no man has gone before. That's a Jupiter and Mars in Gemini statement. But the key here, especially with an Aquarian full moon during this Leo season, is can we present this information authentically, as if we really mean it, an expression of our true self, of our individuality. This is Aquarius. If so, we can present this mountain to climb where we can bring people together to take the action to, give us rocket boosters to fly right to the top. The Jupiter-Mars conjunction can supply the rocket boosters. And the idea of bringing people together is tied up in this idea of Venus is in the mix. Venus is the goddess of love and attraction. So, bringing together many people with a like-minded goal to make the ascent to accomplish a truly great work. That's the Saturn piece. If it is authentic and real, that can be absolutely possible. So Venus, although it's in these hard aspects to these planets, does represent the potential of having a catalytic impact in the direction and flow of people individually, but of the collective, bringing people together, being likable. This is Venus, the goddess of attraction, the goddess of beauty. What about on the negative side of Venus? We do very much want to mention the negative side of these planets because this is a T-square. This is more likely to become obvious, especially in the political eye, because power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So this is going to be, it's probably going to be a mixture of both, actually, to be fair. But the dark side of Venus is she's the master manipulator. Because Venus is so good at building and maintaining the bridge of rapport with other people, if that is used in such a way to manipulate others, it can be used that way. The metaphor I like to use is the unscrupulous car salesman that knows exactly what you need, exactly what you want, and knows the exact right words to say to get you to buy that thing. And since Jupiter and Mars is in the sign of communication, Gemini, but it's also the sign of ideas and the sign of perception, trying to get you to buy ideas. This can be quite compelling. Manipulation is a key element of this, aimed towards massaging your perception of reality or the perception of reality of the collective. If authentic, again, that's the key caveat there. If authentic, this can really bring people together. This T-square can be incredibly galvanizing. Again, on both sides of the political aisle. I'm using the DNC here as an example, but again, Trump's going to be doing his events as well. And again, this can bring people together. This can lift people's spirits because that's the nature of Jupiter. You know, if, for example, it's very common for us astrologers to see very strong Jupiters in the charts of famous people, of course, but also coaches, the coaches of the world. And if you think of a good coach, let's say his team is losing in a big game in the playoffs or something, then comes halftime, the break between each half in the game. He makes this inspiring speech. He lifts the spirits of the team, and they can come back and make a miraculous comeback. So the potential of lifting the spirits of people, of the crowd, with this sort of war cry, you know, there's that Mars energy, vocalizing this energy. It's like, let's be brave, let's be bold, let's be ambitious. Jupiter conjunct Mars is the most ambitious astrological event, at least one of them, that we can experience. This period of time, passivity will not be rewarded. For example, let's say you have Jupiter and Mars contacting a very sensitive point in your own personal chart. Let's say you happen to be a Gemini sun or a Gemini moon, and Jupiter and Mars is sitting right on it in your chart. Every word I'm saying here applies directly to you. Passivity will not be rewarded. It's a time of moving forward, to boldly go where no man has gone before, and figuring out, what am I afraid of? Where am I holding myself back? I've said it on this channel many times, but a key Jupiter question is, how am I underestimating myself? And then what am I going to do about it? There's the Marshall Challenge. And where you figure out where you have a lack of confidence in yourself, nearby you'll find a fear. So there's Jupiter, Mars. So figuring out where that fear is and then going towards that fear, towards expanding Jupiter, the planet of expansion, your comfort zones, Mars. There was a book written by Brene Brown. I never read the book personally, but I've heard her talk about it in interviews, and I've read reviews on it, so I get the gist of it. It's called Daring Greatly. And I have read a synopsis of the book, so I do know the Cliff Notes version. I love that phrase, so I'm going to borrow it here from her, of Mars conjunct Jupiter, daring greatly. And then Saturn represents the mountain to climb. Do you have what it takes? Can I get to the top? This is the energy of this event. This energy can be used for good by anyone across the globe as we seek to evolve, learn, grow, and mature ourselves. But every front has a back. What's the dark side of this energy? Well, I did make mention of, the past not lining up from the future we're presenting, the manipulation component of the dark side of Venus. But in terms of Jupiter, Mars, and Gemini, sticking to the theme of communication that is blustering or boisterous, self-righteous, kind of just like hot air, where there's no real substance behind what is said, and then it just, passes by with no effect. In fact, it would only have a negative impact, because if there is hot air and people believe the dishonesty, where there's no authenticity behind it, again, that's the Aquarian full moon, people can be led astray. So is it daring greatly or hot air? Again, probably shades of gray in between. You yourself have to make the judgment call based on how you, Gemini, perceive reality. And the tragedy of it all is, depending on what political party folks are affiliated with, they'll perceive the opposition as the more hot air and their own party as daring greatly. You laugh or you cry, but there it is. It's fascinating that Kamala Harris is now the nominee as of a couple weeks ago. So I pulled up her chart just out of curiosity. It's like, what was happening 2 weeks ago? And something startling that really popped out to me. Her chart is in the inner ring. I'm not going to do a birth chart analysis of her, but there she is on the inner ring. And here's the astrological events occurring 2 weeks ago on the outer ring. And what we can see here is transiting Uranus, where Uranus is in the sky today, is sitting right on her birth chart Jupiter. Meanwhile, at the same time, transiting Jupiter is in a very tight square to her birth chart Uranus. So it's a double Uranus-Jupiter event on both sides. And this is fascinating because Uranus is the planet of expect the unexpected, of surprise, out of the blue. I didn't see that coming. That's Jupiter, or excuse me, that's Uranus. And Jupiter is the planet of luck and good fortune. And they've done studies on this astrologically. They've studied the charts of people who won big cash prizes like lottery or, hitting jackpot in Vegas and stuff like this. And they wanted to find if they could find an astrological correlation that happened on the day of their windfall breakthrough. And they did. It was very common for them to see, not always, but way above random chance, statistically. It was very common for them to see Uranus-Jupiter interactions as the planet of luck and good fortune interacts with the planet of out-of-the-blue surprise. And she has it on both sides of her chart, which is super cool to see this. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I haven't really analyzed, the transits for Trump and Kamala during election day. I took a quick glance at it. The only thing I noticed is in November, this Jupiter will move onto Kamala's ascendant, which is a major Jupiter event that is quite beneficial and auspicious for her. And then in Trump's chart, I don't remember the details exactly, but he's going through a major Jupiter event in his 10th house, I think like conjunct his sun or something like that, which is another equally strong Jupiter event. So the point is I'm a little bit unsure who's going to win in November. It's going to be a close call because they're both experiencing very beneficial Jupiterian events. I will take a closer look when we get closer to November, really look at all the transits and progressions and see what I see. But it's going to be close. That's my estimation. So as I said right at the beginning, this year, 2024, is so important for political reasons because this sets the pace, this sets the tone for where we're headed over the next few years as we enter into this new world, as the 3 outer planets change signs. And right now, it's about daring greatly. It's about climbing the mountain. It's figuring out where you lack self-confidence. Again, that guided meditation I'm doing is perfect for that. I'll put another link here if you missed it before. But it's like, can I figure out how I'm undercutting my own value, figure out where I'm feeling some fear or trepidation or too much holding back in my life, and say, look, I'm going to apply myself. I believe in myself. I'm going to lift my spirits. I have what it takes to climb the mountain and to do it authentically, Aquarius style. These are the core evolutionary intentions, with the goal being to expand our consciousness. Thanks for watching.